I know you. You're that jaywalking punk anarchist.
Hello, this is the Radical Reviewer taking a look at The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, which came out in 1943. Right off the bat, let me ask you a strange question. Is The Fountainhead an anti-capitalist masterpiece? I mean, the book is about an architect's battle for artistic freedom against the capitalist society he lives in. The book celebrates an artist pursuing their vision without compromise to popularity or market forces or the tastemakers in education or the media, pursuing their artistic creation as purely as possible, which is something that we've seen called for in other anti-capitalist books, such as The Soul of Man Under Socialism or Anarchism and Other Essays. But I don't know. Ayn Rand is a capitalism superfan and has said that this book is about who she perceives to be the ideal person. So, we'll see. Now, this text has a lot going on, so to try and keep track of everything over the course of the story, I'm going to organize the characters on this chart. At the top we have the egoists, who are total chads, hyper-individualist nonconformists. They break from tradition and forge new ground. But not too new, because they are also against modern art, which they see as pushing things too far or pushing in the wrong direction. Then there are the second-handers. They are conformists, and they bring nothing new to the table. They don't even build on what has been done before, but simply recreate what has already been made by others, calling it celebrating the classics or properly honoring tradition. Finally, we have the degenerates. Ayn Rand considers this group second-handers as well, because they are socialists who want to all share and collaborate on each other's work, therefore not creating anything themselves as individuals. But I don't think the second-hander label fits here, because they're not just recreating the work of others, they are creating something new. New styles of architecture, new types of books and plays, new art. It's just that in the story, these degenerates, they're taking things too far. They're destroying and distorting reality with their modern art degeneracy in an evil plot to control people or, control the world. As we'll see, we get a little bit of an anti-globalist, secret cabal, JQ kind of motif with this group. Basically, a big thing to keep in mind going forward is that between World War I and World War II, when this book was written, modern art was taking over the art world with things like Impressionism, Cubism, Dadaism, all that modern art stuff. This was happening for a whole host of reasons. Advances in photography caused a shift away from photorealistic paintings. The horrors of World War I caused a lot of societal self-reflection. There was kind of this hippie movement taking place in the world between establishment and anti-establishment, between convention and the unconventional. For example, in Nazi Germany, a battle between the evil, Jewish, degenerate modern artists and the good and patriotic romantic realist artists.
The Degenerate Art Exhibition clearly was very ideological. It was a way of articulating the Nazi worldview.
A worldview that saw modern art as vulgar and a threat to the German identity.
That's not to say that hating modern art makes you a Nazi, since that's basically a mainstream conservative stance at this point.
You're so ugly you could be a modern art masterpiece.
But when you start arguing that modern art is part of an intentional plot to degenerate society, that's when you start to sound like a Nazi.
Conceptual art is shit. It doesn't enrich our culture. It degrades and cheapens society by exalting the vulgar, the crass, and the scatological.
Anyways, to make this character organization chart really look like it belongs to some kind of kooky conspiracy theorist, I'm going to use thread to tie the various relationships on the board together. Red thread to demonstrate lovers, blue thread will demonstrate friends, and green thread will demonstrate coworkers. You know, green like money. Oh, and there won't be a thread to demonstrate enemies, because in this book it's basically the egoist chads against the world. But alright, so over the course of the video we're going to keep in mind the relationship between artistic creation and capitalist market forces, and we've got this character graphic organizer thing to keep track of everything. So let's get into the text proper, starting with
Part 1, Peter Keating.
Now in my opinion, the first part of this book should be cut. It's a lot of background information that isn't really relevant. The book's long enough as it is, and I think it would have been more interesting to jump into the story proper and get any important background information through flashbacks during part 2. But that's not what we got. So here are some of the most important things discussed in part 1. Right off the bat, we are introduced to our main character, Howard Rourke. He's a student at an architectural college. He's got blondish reddish hair, gray eyes, he's stoic, and gorgeous, his outlook on the world is explained in this way.
He did not laugh as his eyes stopped in awareness of the earth around him. He looked at the granite, to be cut, he thought, and made into walls. He looked at a tree, to be split and made into rafters. He looked at a streak of rust on the stone and thought of iron ore under the ground, to be melted and to emerge as girders against the sky.
Oh, okay, so he sees inspiration for his architectural creativity everywhere he looks. Or maybe he's just really into Factorio or Deep Rock or something. Anyways, describing Howard's room, the text states,
"It was a large, bare room. No pictures, no pennants, no cheering human touch. He had brought nothing to the room but his clothes and his drawings."
This is supposed to show how Howard is this total Chad who only cares about architecture and nothing else. Which makes me ask, has Ayn Rand ever met an artist? I know several painters, musicians, cooks, and I'm not trying to say these folks are messy, but the artistic types that I know are not hyper-minimalists whose homes are nothing but a small pile of sketches and a bed in an empty room. All the artists I know have all kinds of art on their walls and counters and shelves from various other artist friends. They have chaotic workspaces with clutter and supplies and bric-a-brac amidst projects at various levels of completion. You know, how you would expect a creative artistic type to live. In fact, what you're seeing on screen right now are pictures of art spaces from myself and my friends to demonstrate what an artist's work area actually looks like. I guess what I mean to say is, like many of Ayn Rand's characterizations of the real world, this depiction of an artist doesn't correspond with reality. Anyways, back to Howard. Like many of Ayn Rand's protagonists, Howard is a master of all trades, lone wolf, with little or no friends or family. He's the best at what he does, and he sacrifices all human comforts in pursuit of his craft. So of course, Howard Rourke goes at the top of our character diagram because he is an egoist Chad. At architecture college, everyone is expected to study and admire the greats of the past, traditionalist architecture. And so Howard is expelled from college for being such a nonconformist rebel. Meanwhile, his friend, Peter Keating, is excelling in school because he's such a teacher's pet who properly honors tradition. So let's throw Peter into the second-hander conformist section on our character diagram with a blue thread of friendship tying him to Howard. Throughout the story, Peter's submission to those around him is supposed to be the antithesis to Howard's nonconformist egoism. After graduation, Peter gets a job with a mainstream conformist architecture firm ran by Guy Francone, who we will go ahead and add to the second-hander section on the character diagram with some green thread showing that they are coworkers.
Howard, I'm doing really well kissing ass up the corporate ladder at my firm. Everyone is classically trained, just like at school, so it's super easy. But you've always been much better at drawing than I am. Could you help me improve on my blueprints?
Oh, Peter, sure I will help you. It is annoying that traditionalist, conformist firms like yours are so successful in our society. I wonder why that is. Maybe something to do with market forces, promoting mediocrity and mass appeal since that's a safe investment? Who knows? Anyways, I got a job with a nonconformist architect named Henry Cameron. He is totally my mentor, despite being a financial failure. For some reason, being an innovative nonconformist is not a recipe for economic success in the world. It's weird that it's like that. Warning him about his nonconformist egoist ways, Howard's boss/mentor, Henry Cameron, tells him,
"Accept them, Rourke. Compromise. Compromise now, because you'll have to later anyway. Only then you'll have gone through things you'll wish you hadn't. You don't know. I do. Save yourself from that. Leave me. Go to someone else." There will be days when you'll look at your hands and you'll want to take something and smash every bone in them, because they'll be taunting you with what they could do if you found a chance for them to do it, and you can't find that chance, and you can't bear your living body because it has failed those hands somewhere.
I mean, what is all that if not a critique of the way capitalist market forces promote safe, acceptable ideas over new and challenging ones, thus stifling artistic creation? I mean, the starving artist trope doesn't exist for nothing. Cough, cough, patreon.com/radicalreviewer, cough. Anyways, eventually Henry Cameron's firm goes out of business and Howard is out of a job. Peter offers him one at the firm with Guy Francone, but Howard does not want to betray his nonconformist values, so he accepts the job, but only on the grounds that he does grunt work and offers no creative talents to this conformist firm. Similar to the quiet quitting type stuff that was taking place in Atlas Shrugged.
So you're really gonna work with us? Boy, Howard, won't that be swell?
Peter, I will not provide your firm with any of my creative talents. but I will trace blueprints, dig ditches, do welding, or any other grunt work, which of course I can do much better than anyone else because I am such a Chad.
I was a boxer, a dishwasher, a striker, and a strike breaker, yeah. I worked on the railroad, I sang the blues, I played the piano. I was an engineer, an efficiency expert, a male nurse, and an informer. I was everything, yeah.
The way Ayn Rand writes Howard, I assume she thinks Elon Musk can just walk up to a Tesla mid-construction and start working on it. Anyways, some guy wants a nonconformist style building, so Howard is given the job. But Guy Francone's firm wants to make Howard's designs a little bit more conventional, and they have a falling out, and he's fired. He then gets a job with a third architecture firm. However, Howard has a falling out with them as well, but this time the falling out lands him a contract starting his own architecture firm. After being kicked out of architecture college and 3 different architecture firms, my talents are finally being recognized. My first client, a hyper-individualist egoist just like me. I'm totally going to construct this man the coolest house ever. And so he does. And all the architecture magazines mock the house for being hideous. Not only that, the cooks and the other staff that work at the house are mocked by the general public for working at what everyone calls the booby mansion.
Boobs.
This leaves me asking, who is this for then? There are ways to make this make sense. If the architecture magazines hate it but the public loves it, Ayn Rand could be making a statement about how the critics and tastemakers are out of touch with the general public. Like when the audience score on Rotten Tomatoes is much higher than the critic score, like with some Adam Sandler movie or something. Or she could talk about how the general public doesn't like it, but the architectural reviewers in society, the tastemakers who are ahead of the curve, do like it. Like when a film is loved by the critics but not appreciated by the general public. Like Perfect Blue or something. Or, and I think this is what she's trying to go for, it could be hated by the public and the critics, but appreciated by other artists, other architects themselves. Keeping with the film comparison, it would be like a film that is too much of an acquired taste to be appreciated by the general public or critics, but is loved by other filmmakers? Like Rule of Threes, what is a film that is only loved by other filmmakers? I don't know, Giuseppe makes a movie or something. My point is, instead of any of that, basically everyone hates the house that Howard designed. So how am I supposed to believe that Howard is this architectural genius when only like 4 people in the whole book ever like his work? Anyways, because his first project was so poorly received, Howard goes a long time without work, and when he does get a chance to make things, again, everyone hates them. Meanwhile, we are introduced to the main villain of the text, Ellsworth Toohey. He is a collectivist who writes for the failing New York Times. For the Banner, which is a populist newspaper in the story. Let's throw him on the character diagram under the degenerate modernist category for now. We will come back to him later. We are also introduced to Dominique Francone. She is Guy Francone's daughter, Peter's boss's daughter, and is basically the female version of Howard, a total egoist Chad, who happens to be a journalist who writes at the paper with Ellsworth Toohey. So let's get her on the character diagram next to Howard, but with a green coworker thread with Ellsworth. I love Ellsworth's niece, Catherine, because she's a gentle socialite that appeals to my compassionate soul. But I also like my boss's daughter, Dominique, because she's the confident egoist Chad I wish I was. Dominique tells Peter, Peter, if I ever want to punish myself for something terrible, if I ever want to punish myself disgustingly, I'll marry you. Foreshadowing? Let's put that in our back pocket for now. Hey Howard, I really appreciate your help editing my blueprints all these years. It's been nice having someone else do my work, collaborating on my work. Anyways, how have you been? Well, Peter, I'm sick of this town. I've been kicked out of architectural college, fired from multiple firms, and now my own architecture firm has gone out of business. It's hard to be a creative, nonconformist artist making a living in society for some reason that I don't understand. So I'm leaving New York. I'm going to work at a stone quarry in Connecticut instead. So, maybe this book is an anti-capitalist masterpiece after all. What's happened so far in the story we've seen time and time again under capitalism. The mainstream, conventional, mass appeal safe investments, the Peter Keatings of the world, they get promotions, they get projects, they get funding, while the eccentric, challenging, niche, inventive artists like Howard Roark end up penniless. This brings us to Part 2, Ellsworth M. Toohey. As I said, I think it would have been more interesting if the story started here, with Howard Rourke, the egoist nonconformist architect, penniless and slaving away at a stone quarry, while his friend Peter Keating, the conformist, kiss-ass, plagiarist, second-hander architect, is rising the corporate ladder in the city, with flashbacks explaining how things ended up that way. But, I don't know, that's asking Ayn Rand to write a complex and intriguing story. So, let's just get into part 2. Boy, working at a stone quarry is hard. I could join my coworkers when they go to the bar and cafeteria and enjoy in the friendship and camaraderie. But I am a hyper-individualist who hates other people. So instead, I will walk alone in the woods around the quarry and dream about architecture. It just so happens that Peter's boss's daughter, Dominique Francone, is also in Connecticut, staying alone in some mansion where she likes to walk the quarry and see the men work, frequently locking eyes with Howard, who she of course finds attractive. As the text puts it, she thought of the many distinguished men whom she had refused. She thought of the quarry worker. She thought of being broken, not by a man she admired, but by a man she loathed. She let her head fall down on her arm. The thought made her weak with pleasure. Let's keep in mind that despite having this desire, Dominique doesn't tell anyone about it. However, we do get some hot and spicy egoist dialogue between Dominique and Howard. Dominique asks, "Do you get tired?" "Inhumanly." "How does that feel?" "I can hardly walk when the day's ended. I can't move my arms at night. When I lie in bed, I can count every muscle in my body to the number of separate, different pains." She knew suddenly that he was not telling her about himself. He was speaking of her. He was saying the things she wanted to hear and telling her that he knew why she wanted to hear these particular sentences. She felt anger, a satisfying anger because it was cold and certain. Wow, titillating. Anyways, then Dominique is basically like, "Hey, grunt worker, I need some work done on my house. Can you do marble flooring?" "Yes, I can do housework. I know everything there is to know about houses. I'm actually a total genius." "Oh, really? Well, then why don't you come on by then?" So Howard goes to do some housework and also rape Dominique. A sexual assault, which I will now detail and give my analysis of for exactly 3 minutes and 11 seconds. Starting now. Her fists beat against his shoulders, against his face. He moved one hand, took her 2 wrists, pinned them behind her, under his arm, wrenching her shoulder blades. She twisted her head back. She felt his lips on her breasts. She tore herself free. She fought like an animal, but she made no sound. She did not call for help. She heard the echoes of her blows in a gasp of his breath, and she knew that it was a gasp of pleasure. She reached for a lamp on the dressing table. He knocked the lamp out of her hand. The crystal burst into pieces in the darkness. Well, cool protagonist you got there. Anyway, Howard finishes up, I guess, and goes home, where he gets a letter about some architectural work waiting for him back in the city. So he goes back to New York. Although he's happy to do architectural work again, the only thing he cares about, he's surprised that he thought a little bit about Dominique, the woman that he just raped, before leaving for New York. Again, cool protagonist you got there. Dominique reflects on what happened. She had found pleasure in the thing which had happened, that he had known it, and more, that he had known it before he came to her, and that he would not have come, but not for that knowledge. That was the degradation she had wanted, and she hated him for it. "I have been raped. I have been raped by some redhead hoodlum from a stone quarry. I, Dominique Francone." Through the fierce sense of humiliation, the words gave her the same kind of pleasure she had felt in his arms. So, I'm guessing sexual assault is totally okay? If you write it into your story that the victim not only wanted it all along, but that somehow the rapist magically knew not only that the victim wanted to be violently assaulted, but that the rapist wouldn't have engaged in the assault if it wasn't for them magically knowing that the victim wanted to be raped all along? Huh. I'm trying to be fair here. Like, I'm not a prude, I'm not overly sensitive, but I think before we move on, a word on consensual non-consent. I'm certainly not an expert on this, but I do have several friends who've enjoyed consensual non-consent in their sex lives. In consensual non-consent, a lot of the allure comes from being wanted, so overwhelmingly desired that the other person can't help themselves but to ravage you. The desire of both parties in the act are important. It's what makes the act mutually enjoyable. This is very different from actual rape, where the attacker isn't acting out of a desire for the other, but a selfish desire to get their own rocks off at the expense of the other, with no regard to the gratification or consent of the victim they're assaulting, often taking advantage of someone's vulnerabilities, power differences, the use of alcohol or other intoxicants to overcome the victim's consent. Now, I've never read any erotic novels, but it's my understanding that those books handle this distinction well, handle the consent and mutual desire stuff, I mean. This is important when you're writing a story and can control not only the actions of your characters, but how those actions are received and understood, the motivations and the desires of the characters involved. So, short story long, this "she secretly wanted it all along" excuse doesn't make for a sexy instance of consensual non-consent between two characters in a book. It's rape apologia. And that's not cool, Ayn Rand. Not cool. Anyways, back in New York at some social club, a woman who is another one of these modern art degenerates discusses a house that she wants built. She states, "I want a house to be ugly, magnificently ugly. I want it to be the ugliest house in New York." "The ugliest, Mrs. Cook?" "Sweetheart, the beautiful is so commonplace." So, modern art degeneracy is what the people want, huh? I don't know how I feel about this, but okay. I'll make a house with no windows, no electricity. It'll be a hodgepodge of random architectural styles. It will be a total mess.
Conceptual art is shit.
Peter initially feels ashamed about the house that he built and what it says about his artistic abilities, but because it's getting such good press, he begins to feel better about it. Does Ayn Rand think that the artists who made modern art didn't actually want to make it? That they were ashamed of how bad their artwork was, but they did it anyway because the public demanded it? Ayn Rand clearly didn't understand the modern art movement. Anyways, now that Peter has engaged in some modern art architecture, let's move him from the pure second-hander conformist category to something in between second-hander conformist and degenerate modern artists. A party is thrown to celebrate the intentionally ugly house that Peter designed. Howard goes to this party because he knows he'll see Dominique there. And some degenerate at the party states,
"Brains, of course, are a dangerous confession of weakness. It has been said that men develop brains when they have failed in everything else. To display one's brain is so vulgar. It's even more vulgar than to display one's wealth."
So this is supposed to demonstrate the worldview of the degenerate types in the book. Let's address both of these, the brains and the wealth of the argument. I'm assuming here that Ayn Rand is arguing that modern art involves no brains, which isn't true, but let's just work with her logic. If someone were to show Marcel Duchamp a Baroque-style painting that they had made, would he think that it was a vulgar display of their brains? No, I think he would say, "Wow, cool, thanks for showing me." And then maybe the two artists could have a discussion about fine art and the categorizing and curating of artistic styles in the art world and throughout history. What I'm trying to say is, it's literally amoeba-level thinking to say that some Baroque-style painter could show their work to someone who does abstract impressionism or whatever, and the modern artist would complain that the other was engaging in a vulgar display of intelligence. Oh, and regarding the wealth thing, yeah, a lot of folks think it's vulgar to flash your wealth around. That's pretty typical. It's considered impolite. Yeah. As a side note, is this really the best novelist that reactionary right-wing libertarianism has to offer? Can you imagine writing a novel where your political opposition literally complains about how smart and big brain you are? This is so stupid. Anyways, at this point in the story, Dominique is spending her time writing articles celebrating the second-hander degenerate, Peter, while lambasting Howard's architectural projects, while also having crazy sex with Howard on the side. She states, "I will fight to tear every chance you want away from you. I will hurt you through the only thing that can hurt you, through your work. I will fight to starve you, to strangle you on the things you won't be able to reach. I have done it to you today, and that is why I shall sleep with you tonight." The degenerate socialist journalist Ellsworth approves of this dynamic because he wants to destroy Howard. He's like, "Dominique, darling, I know that you have a thing for Howard Rourke. I'm so good at social sciences, I can read people like a book. There's no use in hiding it. I'm going to find a way to destroy both of you because I hate egoism so much. I'm so evil." He states, "This is a pact, my dear, an alliance. Allies never trust each other, but that doesn't spoil their effectiveness. Our motives might be quite opposite, in fact they are, but it doesn't matter. The results will be the same. It is not necessary to have a noble aim in common. It is necessary only to have a common enemy." I don't get it, though. Howard is a good guy protagonist because he stands by his art and is totally uncompromising. Meanwhile, Dominique is writing articles that she doesn't believe in about how conformism and degeneracy are good and egoism is bad so that she can have sex with Howard. If she's an egoist too, shouldn't she be just as uncompromising in her journalism as Howard is with his architecture? Anyways, next we get a detailed look at our main villain, Ellsworth Toohey. Growing up, he was bad at math and the hard sciences, but excelled at the soft sciences like psychology and sociology. He lost religion, but found socialism. Here's some choice quotes from this section. "To achieve virtue in an absolute sense," said Ellsworth Toohey, "a man must be willing to take the foulest crimes upon his soul for the sake of his brothers. No gift is worth a damn unless it's the most precious thing you've got. Give your soul. A man's career concerns all society. The question of whether you could be most useful to your fellow man comes first. It's not what you can get out of society, it's what you can give." Obviously, Ayn Rand thinks that socialism is all about living like Jesus or a monk or something, dedicating your life to charity, giving up all your belongings to the poor. And if you've watched other videos on this channel, you know that this is a ridiculously inaccurate view of socialism. It isn't socialism which is plagued with asceticism, but capitalism. The Sigma male grind set, side hustles, wearing a uniform, signing an employer's non-disparagement agreement limiting what you can say about your job and your private life. Socialism, on the other paw, isn't about sacrifice and submission. As we've talked about several times before, it's about giving people more freedom, more control over their lives and the society around them. Anyways, the history of Ellsworth Toohey concludes with him working at the Banner, where him and a bunch of other socialist beatniks, the 1920s version of the blue-haired SJW, they write for the paper. Their mission statement is, "Writers are the servants of the proletariat." Though Ayn Rand clarifies, here they did not talk so much about the proletariat, but merely rebelled against the tyranny of reality and of the objective. So, in Ayn Rand's view, Ellsworth and his colleagues, they're the bad guys. They all hang out and discuss their ideas at various social clubs and unions. It actually sounds kind of nice, collaborating and camaraderie and all that. This is contrasted with Howard's architectural firm, which I guess is supposed to be Ayn Rand's ideal. They do not go out for drinks. They do not call each other friends. They do not talk outside of work. They only focus on the work. Which sounds super isolated and sad. I mean, very stoic and Chad. A socialite friend asks Ellsworth if he could recommend an architect for a temple that he wants built. And Ellsworth says, "Oh, well, I think Howard should build your temple. He's the perfect guy for the job. In fact, let's make a whole spectacle of it. The temple should be built behind walls with a big public reveal when it's finished." Something fishy's going on there, I think. So Howard gets the job designing the temple. One of the first things he does is have a conversation with a sculptor named Stephen Mallory, who had previously attempted to assassinate Ellsworth Toohey for ruining art and making it all degenerate. Stephen thinks that he's being hired out of pity or because he will be cheap now that no one wants to work with him. But it's actually because Stephen is an egoist Chad just like Howard. "Hey Stephen, I know what would make the perfect sculpture for my temple. You should make one of Dominique." Stephen can't seem to get the sculpture to turn out just right, but when Dominique locks eyes with Howard, suddenly she poses perfectly and Stephen makes the perfect sculpture. Yep, it's just 4 egoist Chads, Howard, Stephen, Dominique, and Mike, an egoist electrician that Howard had met earlier in the story, all making a temple together all day and hanging out all night. "This temple is going to be so cool." "Yes, it is, because you guys are so cool." "Yes, we are. Being egoist Chads is awesome." Wait, didn't Ayn Rand just explain that at Howard's firm the workers didn't mingle outside of work? Or maybe that rule only applies to the working class schmucks and not these 4 cool egoists, apparently. Also, and I wasn't really sure where to put this in the video, but just like there's barely any talk about the workers who construct the architecture, there's no talk about regulations. Which is too bad. I would have loved to see Ayn Rand attempt that conversation. Maybe it would have looked something like this.
Do you want the government to tell you how to do all these things and all the regulations that you got to have your electric thing this far from this and like all
the regulations like that for construction are important though.
I don't think it's the government that they're like, the government gave me this regulation, so that's why I'm going to do it right.
Well, if
You know
they
what I
didn't
mean?
have any regulations, there'd be no incentive whatsoever to do it right.
No, there
If they
would
knew
be an
that-
incentive.
If they knew there were no inspectors, no one was going to check their stuff and make sure that their stuff was up to code. Listen, man, I was in construction my whole life. My dad was an architect.
Yeah.
I've been in construction since I was a little kid. The people who are establishing these codes are licensed builders or people that have been involved in construction for a long fucking time, and they know what's safe and what's not safe. That's why those codes exist. It exists to protect the consumers.
Anyways, Howard's temple is completed and unveiled to the public, and surprise, surprise, the second-handers and degenerates hate it. Ellsworth lambasts the temple in an article stating, "Nobody in his right mind would kneel within Mr. Rourke's temple. The place forbids it. The emotions it suggests are of a different nature. Arrogance, audacity, defiance, self-exaltation. It is not a house of God, but the cell of a megalomaniac. It is not a temple, but its perfect antithesis, an insolent mockery of all religion." The man who hired Howard on Ellsworth's suggestion then sues Howard for malpractice and is trying to get the temple completely redesigned. Howard is such a Chad, he's not even upset, he's just glad the building got to exist at all. Dominique confronts Ellsworth for trying to destroy Howard's career, and he retorts, "You can never ruin an architect by proving he's a bad architect, but you can ruin him because he's an atheist, or because somebody sued him, or because he slept with some woman, or because he pulls wings off butterflies. You'll say it doesn't make sense? Of course it doesn't. That's why it works. Reason can be fought with reason. How are you going to fight the unreasonable?" You're disgusting, Ellsworth. Your horrible plot to degenerate society will be stopped. Don't you see, Dominique? I've committed the perfect crime. It's a shame everyone is too dumb to know that I've tricked them all into hating egoist individualism in favor of collectivist modern art degeneracy. The logic of the lawsuit is this. Although Howard was allowed to make the temple however he wanted, what he made was clearly not a temple based on the history of what a temple is supposed to look like, therefore he did not make what he agreed to make. Wait, but wouldn't this argument include any of the modern art being made in the story as well? Because that stuff also doesn't fit within the traditionalist framework either. Anyway, throughout the trial, Ellsworth and Peter and various other folks all dump on Howard. Then Dominique takes the stand. "Don't you idiots get it? Howard is the exaltation of the human spirit. His work is the most Chad thing to exist and should be seen as such. If you don't understand that, it is because you have been tricked by the degenerates in the media who are making you think that you prefer traditionalist art and modern art over this objectively superior art. Journalism has taken possession of those means and institutions of communication which form and thus finally rule over public opinion. Journalism was very clever indeed, especially in employing its position in the press with the help of so-called art criticism, and succeeding not only in confusing the natural concepts about the nature and scope of art, as well as its goals, but above all in undermining and destroying the general wholesome feeling in this domain." Oh wait, that wasn't a quote from the text, that's part of Hitler's inaugural address to the Great Exhibition of German Art. Oh, and also, Hitler didn't say journalism. I think we know what J word he actually used. Anyways, Howard is such a Chad, the only thing he does during the entire trial is to place some photos of the temple on the judge's podium and say, "The defense rests." Howard loses the case, and in retaliation, Dominique publishes her testimony as an article in the Banner and is promptly fired by Ellsworth. So let's go ahead and cut the green thread between them, I guess. Peter, totally demoralized by the whole ordeal for joining the side of the second-handers and degenerates against his friend Howard, goes off to marry Ellsworth's niece Catherine. But then, Dominique, feeling pretty defeated herself, comes over and asks Peter to marry her. Remember what she said earlier in the text? "Peter, if I ever want to punish myself for something, if I ever want to punish myself disgustingly, I'll marry you." Well, Dominique and Peter get married. So let's tie them together with red thread. She then goes back to Howard and they have a crapload of crazy sex, and then tells Howard that she got married to Peter. Apparently Howard is such an incredible Chad that the only way Dominique could fight off the evil second-handers and degenerates is to marry Peter and thus destroy herself and their world or something. It's stupid and sacrificial, not at all something that a true egoist character interested in their own freedom and pursuing their goals and interests would do. How about instead of marrying Peter, why doesn't she open her own newspaper and compete with the one that she was fired from? That would be a lot cooler and give her character something to do other than being so infatuated with Howard that she has to destroy herself to please him, or whatever. Peter gets the job redesigning the temple, and is sad that he's a conformist sellout while Howard is such a nonconformist Chad. Howard is upset that he lives in a society that doesn't allow artists to have creative freedom. He states, "Most people say they're concerned with the suffering of others. I'm not. And yet there's one thing I can't understand. Don't they know that if suffering could be measured, there's more suffering in Stephen Mallory when he could not do the work he wants to do than in a whole field of victims mowed down by a tank? If one must relieve the pain in this world, isn't Mallory the place to begin?" Howard stands in front of the remodeled temple, seeing it for the first time, and is confronted by Ellsworth. Ellsworth asks him what he thinks. Howard says nothing, but instead asks what Ellsworth is there to tell him, and Ellsworth says nothing.
Part 3. Gail Wynand.
Part 3 starts off with a background on someone new, a guy named Gail Wynand. He's the owner of the paper that Ellsworth Toohey works for, the one that Dominique was fired from. We learn that he was born in the slums of New York and fought and clawed his way to the top. As the text puts it, nobody noticed the slender figure leaning against a lamppost, the aristocrat of the Middle Ages, the timeless patrician whose every instinct cried that he should command, whose swift brain told him why he had the right to do so, the feudal baron created to rule, but born to sweep floors and take orders. He was a genius who learned to read at age 5, learning mathematics from plumbers and sailors, went to church but left because he was too smart for it, went to school but left because he was too smart for it.
Yeah, I was poor, dirt poor. I was born poor. My father worked in the sewers. Then came the Depression. They closed down the schools. No more school. All I had to wear was one suit, nothing but patches, but clean.
While homeless, he offered to work at a newspaper for free, and in just 2 short years, he was an associate editor. He then did a hostile takeover of the entire paper and converted it into a tasteless, populist rag so that he can gain as much power and influence as possible. So now he is a newspaper tycoon playboy with a secret art collection. But what about the character diagram? Gail Wynand is a tricky one. His rags to riches story makes me think he's an egoist Chad. But also, let's look at what he contributes to the world. His newspaper, it only prints what the public wants, second-hander, degenerate type stuff, with no interest in Gail's actual values. So, let's put him smack dab in the middle of the character organizer. I guess with a green thread to Ellsworth, who writes for Gail's paper. Anyways, this all brings us to the present day, where Ellsworth meets with Gail to give him the statue of Dominique from the temple for his secret art collection as part of an upcoming scheme. At the Keating household, Peter is unhappy with his life with Dominique. But I think that might have something to do with the fact that Dominique only married him to punish herself, and so she is purposefully detached from the relationship. Peter thinks to himself, "I know why I can't stand the silence," he thought. "It's because it makes no difference to her at all whether I speak or not. It is as if I didn't exist and never had existed. Dominique, why are you being like this? Why can't you just talk to me?" "Oh, Peter, I'm not being cruel. I'm only being a brainless second-hander like you. I'm just doing it honestly without any pretenses. You borrow your opinions on books from book reviewers, while I simply say nothing. You borrow all your designs for buildings from others, while I simply didn't design anything at all. You see, neither of us are adding anything new to the world. We're the same, you and me." Again, I don't like this handling of Dominique as a character. She's not doing this for herself. She's ruining her life, living every day as a hollow shell just to, epically own Peter, and therefore own the second-handers and degenerates in general by pretending to be one herself. All so she can make herself worthy of Howard? Anyways, Ellsworth then comes to visit the Keating residence. "Peter, my dear boy, how about you do some architecture for Gail Wynand? Wouldn't that be nice? And hey, now that I've titillated him with that statue of your wife, maybe that fuckboy will try and sleep with her, which will destroy her even further." Yeah, some architecture work would be nice. Hey, wait a minute, what was that last part? "Oh, nothing, my dear boy, nothing at all." So, Dominique goes to meet with Gail. "Hi, Gail. I noticed that you have my statue."
"Oh, I hope you don't mind."
"It's okay. You're only the second to last person I'd want having it. I guess I'm glad it's out of Ellsworth's hands."
"Well, let's get down to brass tacks. I'll give your husband some architecture work if you sleep with me."
"He's not a very good architect, but sure." Gail states,
You want to sell yourself for the lowest motive to the lowest person you can find.
I didn't expect you to understand that, she said simply.
You want, men do that sometimes, not women, to express through the sexual act your utter contempt for me.
No, Mr. Wynand, for myself. So, moving things along, Gail and Peter go to a restaurant to talk about the architecture deal they're going to strike.
Peter, the deal is, I'm totally going to bang your wife in exchange for this contract. Sound good?
What? Yeah, I guess so.
Oh, and Dominique, if your goal is to degrade yourself, you should take some lessons from Peter, who is so pathetic, I just cucked him in front of his face.
And so Dominique and Gail hang out as part of their lead up to sleeping together, but they end up hitting it off, talking about how modern art is degenerate and all that.
It is an outrage these modern art degenerates think a urinal is as much a piece of art as that sexy statue of you.
You hate modern art degenerates too? I didn't think you did, since your newspaper prints the opposite.
I just print whatever the people want, because I only want money and power. Anyways, I've decided I don't want to just bang you. We are hitting it off too well. Let's get married instead.
Okay, sure. So Gail goes to Peter to break the news.
Any extra word I speak will be offensive, so I shall be brief. I am going to marry your wife. She's leaving for Reno tomorrow. Here's the contract for Stone Ridge. I've signed it. Attached is a check for $250,000. It is in addition to what you will receive for your work under the contract. I'll appreciate it if you will now make no comment of any kind. I realize that I could have had your consent for less, but I wish no discussion. It would be intolerable if we were to bargain about it. Therefore, will you please take this and consider the matter settled?
This is supposed to show that Peter is a total cuck, but Dominique was intentionally making their marriage awful, so I think this is a win for Peter, really. Anyways, let's cut the red thread between Peter and Dominique and make one between Gail and Dominique. This frustrates Ellsworth because Gail and Dominique getting along rather than hating each other throws a wrench in his plan for destroying her. Dominique meets with Howard to catch him up on everything that's been happening. What do you think about me marrying Gail? To be honest, it's worse than Peter. Peter might be a failed artist who falls for conformist traditionalist and modern art BS, but Gail is a deliberate second-hander of the worst kind, selling out for money and power. Oh, Howard, let's give this all up. You give up architecture, I'll give up on destroying myself for you. Let's get minimum wage jobs and just be together. I can't stand it the way things are. Huh, you wish. You know that it would not be long before you were begging me to do architecture again. We then cut to another meeting of the degenerate socialites where they talk about wanting to destroy society with modern art. Ellsworth is all like, I love the idea of a play about butt skin. It's so degenerate. I will use my position as a journalist to trick the public into thinking that this play is a smash hit. Confirming Ellsworth's power, one of the group members states, well, he did it with the Gallant Galstone, said Lewis Cook placidly. And a worse piece of trash was never put down on paper. I ought to know, but he did it. And I almost lost my job doing it, Toohey said indifferently. It's like Ayn Rand wants it both ways. She wants to critique the traditionalists who just recycle what has been done before and don't create anything new, but she also wants to paint modern art, which was the big thing critiquing tradition at the time of her writing this book, as part of some secret plot to degenerate society. This might seem familiar for those who read Atlas Shrugged, where the evil people are evil on purpose because they just want to destroy the world and cause suffering. It's too bad. I really thought we were going to get an interesting critique of capitalist market forces influencing artistic creation, but now the story is just a bunch of brain-dead Nazi arguments about how modern art is a secret plot to control society. It's like, I don't want to make another video calling Ayn Rand's worldview fascistic, but Ayn Rand, you have to stop making obviously fascist arguments then. Meanwhile, Dominique's father, Peter's boss, Guy Francone, dies, so Peter becomes the new head of the major architectural firm. Hey, you finally reached the top, Peter. How does that feel? I feel great. Awesome. I totally didn't sell out my integrity, my soul for mainstream success. I'm so happy, totally fulfilled. Filled with shame. Gail and Dominique go to see the intentionally bad play about Buttskin, and Dominique concludes, there had always been a god and a devil, only men had been so mistaken about the shapes of their devil. He was not single and big, he was many and smutty and small. The banner had to destroy the soldered temple in order to make room for this play. It could not do otherwise. There was no middle choice, no escape, no neutrality. It was one or the other. Basically, Dominique has come to the understanding that the degenerate journalists lambasting Howard's temple and upholding this play about Buttskin is part of some timeless historical battle for the soul of mankind. Gale explains that he is somehow in on the game as well, that he wants to destroy the Howards of the world and turn them into Ellsworths. He states,
Surely you've heard enough screaming about it. All the giants of the spirit whom I've broken. I don't think anybody ever realized how much I enjoyed doing it. It's a kind of lust. Just let me see a man of slightly higher dimension, and I've got to make a sort of toohey out of him. I've got to. It's like a sex urge. There's not a man living whom I can't force to do anything I choose. That man I couldn't break would destroy me, but I've spent years finding out how safe I am.
So I guess Ellsworth Toohey is the villain because he's intentionally destroying egoism and promoting degeneracy in a plot for power. But Gale Winan is a kind of neutral character because he's unintentionally promoting whatever gets him power, which just happens to be promoting degeneracy, and he's destroying egoism to demonstrate the power that he's gained. Let's see how this plays out, I guess, as we reach the end of the story with
Part 4. Howard Rourke.
I just got a job designing a summer resort, which I will of course design absolutely perfectly. I want to give the middle class something only the rich can afford. Pure privacy, away from the disgusting masses. This resort will have a bunch of private swimming pools attached to private houses. No commons, no socializing, total isolation, as a summer resort should be. Apparently, the summer resort job was supposed to be a scam, and Howard was chosen to intentionally bankrupt the project, but it ends up doing really well, and this gets Gale Winan's attention.
Howard, I've been looking over your work. It's so egoist, it's wonderful. I would love for you to build my house.
Based on how totally degenerate your newspaper is, Gale, I think you're probably the worst person in the world. Did Dominique recommend me?
No, not at all. I looked at the work of a bunch of different architects, and your work had that special egoist isolationism that I want.
Apparently, Gale's dream house is
a residence for 2 people only, my wife and me. It won't be necessary to allow for a family. We don't intend to have children, nor for visitors. We do not intend to entertain.
Wow, well, doesn't that sound lovely? Getting even weirder, he states,
I can't stand to see my wife among other people. It's not jealousy, it's much more and much worse. I can't stand to see her walking down the streets of a city. I can't share her, not even with those shops, theaters, taxicabs, or sidewalks. I must take her away. I must put her out of reach, where nothing can touch her, not in any sense. This house is to be a fortress, and my architect is to be my guard.
Oh? Total individualist isolation? Maybe I was mistaken about you, Gale. Perhaps you are secretly an egoist Chad after all. Talking to you is like talking to myself.
Oh, we're egoist Chads, all right. We're like that blonde, handsome guy with the beard from the memes. We're just better than other people. That's why we should have all the power.
Well, I don't really want power like you, Gale. I just want to be able to do architecture.
And you should be allowed to, Howard, despite what these idiots want from you. God, I just hate idiots. That's why I want to control the idiots around me.
So, Gale and Howard fall into a wonderful bromance. Sure, Gale told Dominique that he wants to destroy men like Howard and turn them into people like Ellsworth, but I guess that was only because he wanted to find someone he could not destroy, and it turns out Howard is just the Chad he's been waiting for. While visiting Howard at work, Gale says dreamily,
It's almost useless to talk to you, Howard. I always feel as though I were reading to you a carbon copy of myself, and you've already seen the original. You seem to hear everything I say a minute in advance. We're unsynchronized.
You call that unsynchronized?
All right, too well synchronized.
Well, aren't they cute together? So Gale and Howard keep having these little hangouts and talking about how everyone is stupid and they're wonderful and perfect. But what's Dominique been up to this whole time? Well, I guess Gale was right that he wanted a house to be a fortress, or maybe more like a jail cell. Dominique's life seems as bad as those parts in Handmaid's Tale where June is locked up in her room for days on end. As the text explains it, she accepted Rourke's visits to their house, and the knowledge that in the hours of these evenings he was Winans' property, not hers. She met him as a gracious hostess, indifferent and smiling, not a person but an exquisite fixture of Winans' home. She presented at the dinner table. She left them in the study afterwards. She sat alone in the drawing room, with the lights turned off and the door open. She sat erect and quiet, her eyes on the slit of light under the door of the study across the hall. She thought, "This is my task, even when alone, even in darkness, with no knowledge but my own, to look at that door as I looked at him here, without complaint. Rorik, if it's the punishment you chose for me, I'll carry it completely, not as part to play in your presence, but as a duty to perform alone. You know that violence is not hard for me to bear, only patience is. You chose the hardest, and I must perform it and offer it to you, my dearest one." So, Gale's house was fit for two. It just was apparently that the two were Gale and Howard, with Dominique being reduced to basically like a vacuum cleaner, occasionally brought out when needed, but otherwise tucked out of sight. I guess Dominique puts up with this because it's Howard's punishment for her in order to deserve him. Was this book written by a woman, or was it written by some sort of incel with very troubling ideas of how men and women should interact with each other? Anyways, let's leave these three glorious nonconformist chads, or well, I guess Dominique's a piece of furniture now, so 2 chads and a trad wife? We'll leave these awesome good guys for a brief look at our awful bad guys. Ellsworth is at another one of his socialist meetings, talking about how they want to be evil and degenerate society. He states, "In essence, freedom and compulsion are one. Let me give you a simple illustration. Traffic lights restrain your freedom to cross the street whenever you wish. But this restraint gives you the freedom of not being run over by a truck. If you were assigned to a job and prohibited from leaving it, it would restrain the freedom of your career, but it would give you the freedom from the fear of unemployment. Whenever a new compulsion is imposed upon us, we automatically gain a new freedom. The two are inseparable. Only by accepting total compulsion can we achieve total freedom." This is a standard conservative argument, thinking that socialism is all about wanting a 1984-style police state. Conservatives can think this because they don't understand the difference between a negative freedom, that being a lack of restraint, such as freedom of speech, and a positive freedom, that being access to an opportunity, such as free education. Here's another choice quote from this meeting. "I can't understand why people of culture and position like us understand the great ideal of collectivism so well and are willing to sacrifice our personal advantages, while the working man, who has everything to gain from it, remains so stupidly indifferent. I can't understand why the workers of this country have so little sympathy with collectivism." This is another fairly standard conservative argument, where they pretend the term socialism refers to this caricature of a liberal elite ivory tower college graduate who looks down their nose at the real working class, totally ignoring the countless working class socialists all over the world and throughout history. Meanwhile, Peter is reflecting on his architecture firm, which has now been reduced to a single floor in a building and will soon go out of business altogether. While talking with some friends about the economy, Keating gathered from a long, confused speech that business, as they had known it, was finished. The government would take over whether they liked it or not, that the building trade was dying and the government would soon be the sole builder, and they might as well get in now if they wanted to get in at all. So Peter tries to get in and gets a contract developing a low-income housing project. After drawing up some blueprints, he goes to have Howard look them over.
"Hey, Howard. Wow, your office is much nicer than mine. Well, anyways, hey, could you look over my latest blueprints, please?"
"It's not only my office, Peter. I look better than you too. I look young and fit, while you look old and fat. But enough about that. Sure, I will look over your blueprints for you." I'm guessing Ayn Rand literally thinks that being socially minded makes you fat and ugly, while being an egoist individualist makes you sexy. Anyways, Peter says,
"Howard, I'm a parasite. I've been a parasite all my life. I've fed on you and all the men like you who lived before we were born. The men who designed the Parthenon, the Gothic cathedrals, the first skyscrapers. If they hadn't existed, I wouldn't have known how to put stone on stone. In the whole of my life, I haven't added a new doorknob to what men have done before me."
"It's true, Peter. Being a second-hander is pathetic and awful."
"Howard, I'm so dang hopeless and helpless. Can you just design this housing project for me and let me take all the credit, please?"
Peter, you're going to have to sell it better than that.
You'll make a lot of money?
I already have money, Peter.
It's a low-income housing project, so you'll be providing housing for needy people?
Peter, you should know better than that. I don't care about people, especially the disgusting poor.
His eyes dropped, his voice low. Keating said, You love designing it?
Yes, Peter. Now you're speaking my language.
Explaining his real motives, Howard adds,
To get things done, you must love the doing, not the secondary consequences. The work, not the people. Your own actions, not any possible object of your charity. I'll be glad if people who need it find a better manner of living in a house I designed, but that is not the motive of my work, nor my reason, nor my reward.
However, this isn't true at all. We know from the artistic creativity of musicians and painters and cooks and whatever in our lives that people actually do get fulfillment and motivation from seeing others enjoy their work. When I'm working in the kitchen, I love hearing people say that the food I'm making looks really good or that it's really delicious. When I spend countless hours making a YouTube video, I love seeing folks comment that I help them understand a complex text or idea better. Is Ayn Rand not familiar with the motivation that comes from seeing other people enjoy her work? Anyways, Howard and Peter make a deal. Howard will design the housing project his way and give Peter all the credit, providing that Peter keeps the second-handers and degenerates away from messing with Howard's designs. Before they part ways, Peter shows Howard some paintings he'd made, which he has never shown anyone. Howard tells Peter that it is too late for him to be a painter, he'd wasted his chance. I really can't make it as a painter, Howard? Is that what you're saying?
Well, Peter, maybe if you started developing this talent when you were younger, maybe you could have been something. But Peter, it is too late for you now.
Because on top of knowing everything about making a building, everything from architecture to welding, Howard is also an expert on paintings as well. I bet Peter could have showed Howard some music he'd composed, and Howard could look down at the sheet music and tell Peter whether it was good or not. This is just the way that Ayn Rand writes her protagonists. Meanwhile, Gale becomes wise to the fact that Ellsworth and his degenerate friends have been using his newspaper to intentionally degenerate society. Gale had noticed the cautious slanting of news stories, the half hints, the vague allusions, the particular adjectives particularly placed, the stressing of certain themes, the insertion of political conclusions where none was needed. If a story concerned a dispute between employer and employee, the employer was made to appear guilty simply through wording, no matter what the facts presented.
Ugh, I can't believe my newspaper's being controlled by degenerate Jews. I mean, journalists. Oh well, I have more important things on my plate. Howard, do you see those horrible slums across the street?
Sure, Gale. What about them?
Well, I grew up there, and a few years ago I bought up the slums I'd grown up in, and soon I'd like you to level it and turn it into a beautiful giant skyscraper.
I do love designing architecture, and I don't care about poor people. Sure, Gale, let's gentrify the hell out of your childhood home.
Gale states,
My last and greatest achievement will also be your greatest. Look at that horror across the street. I want to sit here and watch you looking at it. That's what we're going to destroy, you and I. That's what it will rise from. The Wynand Building by Howard Rourke.
Now, probably Ayn Rand would argue that this isn't capital G gentrification, but rather that it's new investments. It'll bring in new jobs, improve the lives of those who deserve it. And anyone who can't hack it, can't afford to stay in that neighborhood, they're probably just lazy bums who deserve to be kicked out. The poor in Ayn Rand's books are either A, people to be frowned upon and done away with, or B, to be the nothing from which a hero or two rises from.
Hey, Howard, you finished drawing up those designs for Peter's housing project, right? Why don't we take a vacation? We can take my yacht, the one that I'm known for taking women on.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Let's take a vacation together.
While on the yacht, Gale and Howard have their usual philosophical talks.
You know, Howard, I'm the perfect embodiment of Ellsworth's worldview. I sold out all of my values to give the public whatever they wanted.
He states,
The Wynand papers, for 31 years, they have represented everybody except Gale Wynand. I erased my ego out of existence in a way never achieved by any saint in a cloister, yet people call me corrupt.
The problem, Gale, is that these second-handers and degenerates have too much power in society.
Howard states,
They have no concern for facts, ideas, work. They're concerned only with people. They don't ask, is this true? They ask, is this what others think is true? Not to judge, but to repeat. Not to do, but to give the impression of doing. After centuries of being pounded with the doctrine that altruism is the ultimate ideal, men have accepted it the only way it could be accepted, by seeking self-esteem through others, by living second-hand, and it has opened the way for every kind of horror. I want to note here, Ayn Rand is arguing that being a second-hander, being a conformist who does whatever you're told, is the natural outcome of altruism. But this is obviously not true. Activists, agitators, revolutionaries throughout history have been very confrontational, very nonconformist with their altruism. Ayn Rand just wants to shoehorn in her hatred of altruism as the antithesis to her ideals. The funny thing is, it isn't. Sure, you could be an altruist because you're being a conformist and doing what you're told, but you could even be an altruist who is an uncompromising individualist who hates other people in collectivism, but nevertheless comes to the conclusion that properly funding education and social services will, as the data bears out, selfishly improve your life individually. Anyways. Howard, however, does not tell Gale that the worst type of second-hander are those who seek power for its own sake, which is apparently the kind of second-hander that Gale is. Anyways, after 3 months of waxing philosophically on a yacht, Gale and Howard return to New York. When back at the office, Howard's employees fall all over themselves, jerking him off about how much they miss him and how awesome he is. Checking the newspaper, Howard sees that not only has Peter taken credit for the housing development, but several other architects were credited as well. Oh no, Peter didn't keep his word. There has been interference with Howard's vision of the housing project. Peter tries to explain himself. What are you going to do? You must leave that up to me now. I couldn't help it, Howard. I couldn't help it. I suppose not. What can you do now? You can't sue the government. Howard goes to Dominique to tell her to have her car broken down near the housing development, so that the security guard will leave his post and go help her. Maybe while the security guard is distracted, Howard will single-handedly revert the whole housing project back to his original design overnight? Well, if you remember what the capitalists did to the government industry in Atlas Shrugged, you might be able to guess what happens next. Dominique couldn't help her curiosity. She leaves her car and goes up to the housing project to see what Howard is up to, and the whole place explodes.
Glass and twisted iron were raining around her, in the flash when walls rose outward and a building opened like a sunburst. She thought of him there, somewhere beyond, the builder who had to destroy, who knew every crucial point of that structure, who had made the delicate balance of stress and support. She thought of him selecting these key spots, placing the blast, a doctor turned murderer, expertly cracking heart, brain, and lungs all at once. He was there. He saw it, and what it did to him was worse than what it did to the building. But he was there, and he welcomed it.
So, screw housing poor people, apparently. Howard tells Dominique that she ought to rough herself up like her car so that she'll have an alibi regarding the explosion.
She took a sharp splinter and slashed the skin of her neck, her legs, her arms. What she felt was not pain. She saw blood shooting out of her arm, running down on her lap, soaking the black silk, trickling between her thighs. Her head fell back, mouth open, panting. She did not want to stop. She was free. She was invulnerable. She did not know she had cut an artery. She felt so light. She was laughing at the law of gravity.
So Dominique ends up spending several days in the hospital. Like, as a character, Dominique is a journalist and she's supposed to be similar to Howard in regards to egoism and nonconformism. And yet, all she's done is distorted and ruined her articles for Howard, sitting alone in a dark room of her own house while Howard and her husband hang out for Howard, and now she's put herself in the hospital for Howard. I don't know, doesn't sound very egoist to me. Sounds more like she's spending the whole book living her life for someone else. To make matters worse, Gale, who was so obsessed with Dominique he had a house built designed to hide her from the world, he's just as willing to throw everything away for Howard as she is. Dominique asks Gale if he's happy with what she did, and he says,
I'm glad you did it, and that it was for him. I'm glad he did it. He had to.
Yeah, he's happy that his own wife almost died cutting herself up with a piece of debris to cover up for his friend Howard blowing up a low-income housing project. Very cool. Apparently, Howard is such a Chad that when he pushed down the plunger to blow up the housing development, he just stood next to the plunger with his hands in his pockets, waiting for the police to arrive and arrest him. Oh, and by the way, Gale says that seeing his wife in the hospital wasn't troubling, but seeing Howard in jail was just too much for him. Anyways, Howard pleads not guilty, which makes no sense since he totally did the crime and basically turned himself in. But Peter puts out a statement about how he thinks that Howard is innocent, and Gale starts using his newspaper to put out articles supporting Howard as well, with Gale writing,
Any illiterate maniac, any worthless moron who commits some revolting murder gets shrieks of sympathy from us and marshals an army of humanitarian defenders. But a man of genius is guilty by definition. Granted that it is vicious injustice to condemn a man simply because he's weak and small, to what level of depravity has a society descended when it condemns a man simply because he is strong and great? Such, however, is the whole moral atmosphere of our century. The century of the second-rater.
But it's hard for Gale to convince people of Howard's innocence when the Banner has spent so much ink condemning him and favoring conformism and modern art degeneracy. Peter, my dear boy, you know that we don't want to kill Howard, right?
But you are killing him. If he can't be an egoist architect, he might as well be dead.
Well, not dead, Peter, but yes, we want Howard's egoism to be broken. I want him in prison, where he'll be told when to wake up, when to work, and what to work on. His egoist individualism will be stomped out of him.
Okay, fine, Ellsworth. I guess you have beaten Howard once and for all. I have nothing left to do but hand you the contract that Howard and I had together. Here, take it.
Wow, great work, Peter. You've done something I've been trying to do for years. Getting someone else to do all the work while taking none of the credit. I'm jealous, Peter. Really? Ellsworth states, if you learn how to rule one single man's soul, you can get the rest of mankind. It's the soul, Peter, the soul, not whips or swords or fire or guns. He goes on to explain how this is done. Here's one way. Make man feel small. Make him feel guilty. Tell man that altruism is the ideal. Not a single one of them has ever achieved it, and not a single one ever will. Since the supreme ideal is beyond his grasp, he gives up eventually all ideals, all aspirations, all sense of his personal value. Here's another. Kill a man's sense of values. Kill his capacity to recognize greatness or achieve it. Set up standards of achievement open to all, to the least and most inept, and you stop the impetus, the effort in all men, great or small. Kill reverence, and you've killed the hero in man. I guess this is why Ellsworth supported Peter's mediocre architecture, supported that play about Buttskin and all that degenerate art. Here's another way. This is most important. Don't allow men to be happy. Make them feel that the mere fact of a personal desire is evil. Empty man's soul, and the space is yours to fill. Everything I said is contained in a single word. Collectivism. And isn't that the god of our century? To act together, to think together, to feel together, to unite, to agree, to obey, to serve, to sacrifice? So this is the big, evil, degenerate plot of collectivism, of socialism. Which, if you've watched enough of my channel, you know that this is absolutely true. All the talk about expanding individual freedom beyond its current parameters, that's all hogwash. My real goal has always been to destroy everyone's soul, make them all feel guilty all the time, to not know what to value, and to never be happy. The only thing here that has any relevance to socialism is the term collectivism, which Ayn Rand hilariously misunderstands. If you agree with any of Ayn Rand's framing here, please go watch my video on no bosses, and then come back and tell me if socialism is an evil plot to control everyone. Anyways, with Gale now writing articles celebrating Howard and egoism, while Ellsworth has spent years working to undermine him by writing articles condemning Howard and egoism, things finally come to a head.
Ellsworth, your degeneracy has ruined my paper for long enough. You are fired.
Oh, Gale, you haven't seen the last of me. I'm leaving and I'm taking all the union members with me. Next time you see me, I'll be running this paper. So let's cut the green thread between Gale and Ellsworth, because now a strike has begun, and the union has two demands. 1. Reinstate those who were recently fired, and 2. Reverse the paper's opinion on Howard's trial. Gale is getting desperate. He tries to hire strikebreakers, but they're beaten up by the union members. He tries to hire kids fresh out of journalism school, but they all refuse to work for him. So he ends up hiring a bunch of drunks and bums.
Dominique, I passed the picket line today. What a bunch of ugly, fat, filthy people. They probably can't even read the paper. I'm basically running things by myself now. I'm down to a skeleton crew of drunks and bums. I've been sleeping on the floor and coughing up blood. But hey, I'm just on that Chad egoist grind set. Hustle culture, baby.
Oh, Gail, I think I should come help you run things. I'll write a crapload of articles. I'll write movie reviews for movies I've never seen, reviews of cookbooks I've never used. Let's do what we can to keep this newspaper afloat. But all their work is for nothing. Bundles of the paper are returned unread. There's a stockholders meeting, and they tell Gale to give up this fight, to hire back all the strikers except Ellsworth, and to reverse his position on Howard's trial. Not only to stop the strike, but because they need to win back readers. Gale walks the streets defeated. He approaches a pawn shop. He stopped and looked at it. He thought,
The most indecent sight on earth, a pawn shop window. The things which had been sacred to men, and the things which had been precious, surrendered to the sight of all, to the pawing and the bargaining, trash to the indifferent eyes of strangers, the equality of a junk heap, typewriters and violins, the tools of dreams, old photographs and wedding rings, the tags of love, together with soiled trousers, coffee pots, ashtrays, pornographic plaster figures, the refuse of despair, pledged not sold, not cut off in clean finality, but hawked to a stillborn hope never to be redeemed.
Is this another anti-capitalist argument? It's been so many pages since we've had a cogent argument about artistic creation in society. But I mean, he's not wrong. It's not for no reason that someone had to give up their dreams by pawning their violin or typewriter. Anyways, Gale returns, defeated.
All right, all you second-handers and degenerates, you win. I will betray Howard and all our ideals. I will put out a newspaper berating Howard as an antisocial egoist who deserves the worst punishment for his crimes.
Howard tries to get in contact with Gale, but his butler won't let him in his house. His secretary won't let him in his office. So Howard writes him a letter saying that he forgives Gale, but that Gale needs to pick up the fight again and fight for their ideals once more. Disgusted by Gale's betrayal, Dominique goes to Howard's place and they have sex. Then, Dominique calls the police over so that the tabloids would know that Gale's wife and Howard are having an affair. Gale is given a story about the affair to put in his paper, and he runs it, and starts the process for divorcing Dominique. So let's go ahead and cut the red thread between them, and we'll finally add one between Dominique and Howard.
Even as the dynamite which swept a building away, his motive blasted all sense of humanity out of this man's soul. We are dealing, gentlemen of the jury, with the most vicious explosive on earth, the egotist.
Howard's trial has begun, and apparently, rather than dealing with the facts of the case, like asking if Howard had the means and motive to blow up the housing development, or if he was at the scene of the crime when it happened, nope, none of that. Just a bunch of blathering about how egoism is the scourge on society, or whatever. Howard takes the stand and gives a speech lasting only 5 short pages. Short compared to John Galt's 60-page speech in Atlas Shrugged. Anyway, in part, Howard states, "Thousands of years ago, the first man discovered how to make fire. He was probably burned at the stake he had taught his brothers to light. Centuries later, the first man invented the wheel. He was probably torn on the rack he had taught his brothers to build. He was considered a transgressor who ventured into forbidden territory. The great creators, the thinkers, the artists, the scientists, the inventors, stood alone against the men of their time. Every great new thought was opposed. Every great new invention was denounced. The first motor was considered foolish. The airplane was considered impossible. The power loom was considered vicious." Okay, first of all, why isn't anyone saying
objection? Relevance?
Like, what does any of this have to do with a fairly cut and dry case of arson? Anyways, yeah, Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, the Wright brothers, Steve Jobs, these people are totally hated by everyone. Nobody writes books or movies glorifying their lives or anything like that. I think someone needs to get Howard, and by extension Ayn Rand, a history book. Preferably a grade school level text, I think. Anyway, Howard continues. "Creation comes before distribution, or there will be nothing to distribute. The need of the creator comes before the need of any possible beneficiary. Yet we are taught to admire the second-hander who dispenses gifts he has not produced above the man who has made the gifts possible. Like, at the most basic level, yeah, sure. Like the brochure on the airplane says, secure your oxygen mask first before assisting others. But Ayn Rand isn't discussing a disaster situation where we're trying to meet our basic needs. She's arguing, as a general rule for society, that altruism, that helping others, is bad. The first part kind of seems like your standard anti-welfare, anti-charity type argument. We can't have any redistribution of resources or welfare because that would be giving to someone who doesn't deserve it. Forgetting that basically that's how all human evolution works. Like when the next generation is born, their society gives them education and skills and tools so that they can build on what came before them. But aside from that, I want to focus on the part where he says, we are taught to admire the second-hander who dispenses gifts that he has not produced. Isn't that what we do in society under capitalism? Admiring the company owner over the workers? Even in this book, admiring the person at the head of a project while ignoring the workers that make large creative projects possible. But Howard disagrees. He states, civilization is the progress toward a society of privacy. The savage's whole existence is public, ruled by the laws of his tribe. Civilization is the process of setting man free from men. Getting a little into Ayn Rand's xenophobia about other cultures, I guess. No wonder Howard's various projects are all explained to be very isolated and resistant to socializing. Howard continues, now you know why I dynamited Court Lant. I designed Court Lant. I gave it to you. I destroyed it. I destroyed it because I did not choose to let it exist. It was a double monster, in form and in implication. I had to blast both. I agreed to design Court Lant for the purpose of seeing it erected as I designed it, and for no other reason. That was the price I set for my work. I was not paid. Thus concludes a summary of what Howard said in the courtroom. Again,
objection, relevance,
to like 90% of what he just said. But I guess that doesn't matter, right? Because at the very end, he confessed to his crime. He admitted that he was the one who blew up the low-income housing project, so I guess he's going to prison, right?
Howard Rourke stepped forward and stood facing the jury. At the back of the room, Gail Wynand got up and stood also. Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict? We have. What is your verdict? Not guilty.
Huh. Okay. I guess Ayn Rand thinks it's totally legit to blow up someone else's private property if you feel you have a moral justification to do so. Well, I can get behind that, I guess. Property is theft, right, Comrade Ayn Rand? Well, not quite. The low-income housing project was set to be rebuilt, not by the government, but by a private contractor, and of course, Howard was hired to do the job. Meanwhile, Ellsworth wins his case against the labor board and gets hired back at Gale's newspaper. Ellsworth states, I'm happy as a kid to be back, honestly, Mr. Winan. I suppose I shouldn't confess it, but I miss this place like all hell. Winan made no movement to go. He stood, slouched as usual, his shoulder blades propped against the door jamb, arms crossed on his chest, hands holding his elbows. Toohey moved a pencil over a sheet of paper till he realized that the sheet lay in the lamplight, and Winan could see the pencil making a water lily, a teapot, a bearded profile. He dropped the pencil and made a self-mocking sound with his lips. He opened a drawer and looked attentively at a pile of carbons and paper clips. He did not know what he could possibly be expected to do. He did not start writing a column just like that. This is supposed to show how Ellsworth is actually a total weasel who's incapable of writing an article, but throughout the book he's portrayed as this great orator who can talk at length on all kinds of subjects, so it's pretty out of character for him to act like he can't write all of a sudden. If anything, what should have happened is that he could pitch a bunch of degenerate ideas for columns, and then Gale would then expose how stupid they were with facts and logic. Or something like that. Anyways, this was all just a big show, because apparently Gale bought all the shares in the newspaper and was liquidating the company so he can start a new newspaper from scratch, one that more properly represents his ideals. Gale hires Howard to build the tallest building in New York, destroying the slums that he grew up in. Gale says,
build it as a monument to that spirit, which is yours and could have been mine.
Sometime shortly after, Dominique walks up to the partially built Gale Winan building, and we get the last lines of the book, which are kinda clever. We see the egoist individualist Howard Rourke both literally and figuratively exalted above capitalism, the government, and religion. The text states,
she saw him standing above her on the top platform of the Winan building. He waved to her. The line of the ocean cut the sky. The ocean mounted as the city descended. She passed the pinnacles of bank buildings. She passed the crowns of courthouses. She rose above the spires of churches. Then there was only the ocean, and the sky, and the figure of Howard Rourke. The end.
Conclusion. You know, I actually think, despite saying that the first part of this book should have been cut and turned into flashbacks, I think this text is more interesting than Atlas Shrugged. Rather than just being about essentially two groups, utopian capitalists and dystopian bleeding hearts, as I called them in my Atlas Shrugged review, this story has, of course, the equivalent to the utopian capitalists, the egoists, but they're fighting both traditionalists who are stuck in the past and adding nothing new, and degenerate modernists who are pushing architecture in what they consider to be the wrong direction. Not only this, the characters in Atlas Shrugged feel more stagnant, more fixed in their roles, where here, characters like Peter Keating and Gail Wyman, they just gray up the place with their movement between categories over the course of the story. It's also easier to identify with the characters of this book. As hyper-fixated and rigid as Ayn Rand's protagonists often are, I can identify with an architect or a journalist easier than a railroad tycoon or some adamantium inventor or perpetual motion engine inventor like in Atlas Shrugged. I would say, though, one advantage of Atlas Shrugged has to be that it's more timeless, taking place in a dystopian future, whereas The Fountainhead basically takes place in the 1920s. All that said, as much as I wanted this book to be an anti-capitalist masterpiece, or at the very least bring up some interesting ideas about artistic freedom under capitalism, as I thought it might do when I started reading this book, unfortunately, this book is obviously not anti-capitalist, and most certainly not a masterpiece. Although I just congratulated the book for having various factions with competing motives, it's too bad that so much of the book is arguing that there's a secret plot to promote degeneracy in society. Like, I get it. This book is supposed to be about Ayn Rand's ideal person, an uncompromising individualist egoist. Think about it in a morality sense. Howard sticks to his ideals even when he's mocked and ridiculed and gets kicked out of college and fired from various jobs because of it. Meanwhile, Peter has no ideals. He just does whatever everyone else tells him to do. Everything his mom tells him to do, everything his teachers tell him to do, everything his bosses tell him to do, never asserting himself. There is a skeleton of a story worth telling there, one that even a dirty anarcho-communist like myself can get behind, as an artist who tries to be uncompromising against audience capture or appealing to trends while on a hostile capitalist platform. But for this story to work, there has to be a set of ideals for the protagonist to be uncompromising about, and a society contrary to those ideals for him to be uncompromising against. And this is where the story completely falls apart. Ayn Rand just can't help herself but to claim that the degeneracy she sees in the world is part of a secret plot for world domination. I guess it's not that surprising. She was a devout anti-communist, and there was, let's say, a close friendship between fanatical anti-communism and being anti-modern art, anti-degeneracy, anti-swing music, anti-Semitic, leading up to World War II. If she would have just dropped the deranged conspiracy theories around modern art, we could have had a more logically coherent story. And I know that I keep joking that this would be a big critique of capitalism, but it doesn't even have to be that either. Ayn Rand could have focused her critique on the divide between classically trained, old money ivory tower, second-hander tastemakers in society being challenged by the inventive, new money, creative entrepreneur types. Such a story could be written critiquing artistic creation under capitalism and still be a pro-capitalist, anti-union, anti-poor, right-wing libertarian novel. But this is an Ayn Rand book. We didn't get that story. We got hints of that story, overshadowed by a bunch of Nazi conspiracy theories about how journalists are promoting modern art as a secret plot to degenerate and control society. Anyways, as always, I'd like to thank my wonderful patrons. Your tremendous support has allowed me to get dog insurance, which is wonderful. You've allowed me to support other creators I couldn't otherwise support. Gotta love that. You've provided me with a little extra funds for books and dog toys and things like that, which is really awesome. I appreciate you folks a lot. And if you like what I do here and you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/radicalreviewer. If you're interested in radical theory, looking for a book recommendation or whatever, you can get your radical reviews here with the Radical Reviewer. Thanks for watching.
Can't take no more than get out of the way, for we've got a day to get through. We wire their castles, their prisons and banks, know their mansions from cellar to roof. We've got hammers and wrenches and chisels, we could destroy any great wall we come to. But I am a lowly carpenter, so what have I power to do?
Never before on the face of the earth. It's not for next year. It's not for tomorrow. It's for right now. It's for one and for all and all for one. Yeah, step right up. It's free and it's freedom. And there is only one freedom, and it's your freedom and it's mine. And freedom is freedom!